Okay, welcome. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. You've made it to session number 3 of the Wholesale Readiness Training. All of us trainers and planning team folks are really excited to have you here. We're hoping that over the course of the last week or so, that you had a chance to dig into some of the homework. Got lots of emails this morning with questions and concerns. So Natalie is going to definitely help out with addressing some of those things. And I think, just to kick things off, we'll have folks throw in the chat. If you want to, again, just because, it's always good to remind each other of where we're at and what we're doing. If you want to change your name within Zoom, again, you hover over your own video and then push those 3 dots that are in the upper corner, and you can rename yourself. And then you could add in where you're located or your farm name if you'd like. And then let's have you throw in the chat. What is a way maybe that you celebrate the depths of winter? Like, how do you stay motivated when it gets to this tail end of the season and we sort of, I don't know, need that extra boost of positivity and inspiration? I don't know if someone wants to capture that and throw it into the chat. But I think that would be good. Yes, cross-country skiing. I love it. Starting seeds. Sauna, absolutely. Grow lights, yes. Maple sugar season. Oh, I love it. Video games and ramen, keeping it real. Love it. Yes. Take advantage of the outdoors, long walks. Yes, or just leave the country, right? That's a good idea, Allison. There's a lot of us that do that. This is good. Okay, well, keep throwing things in the chat. We're really excited to kick things off. I think that we're gonna just share a couple of things today, just regarding tech stuff. Again, I have an update regarding where some of the information is. It's being sort of housed. Then we'll pass it over to Natalie. We'll kind of check in regarding the work that you guys have been doing over the last week or so. Give you some time to talk to each other, work through, where did you get hung up, that kind of stuff. And then we've got Brett today, who's going to be sharing about buyer connections. We're really excited for that. And we'll have a break somewhere in there. And then we will send you off into the depths of the end of February to continue on. I love this, watching for births of baby goats. Oh, it's so lovely. Okay, so we've got videos that are up now. I'm hoping that what you see is the Wholesale Readiness page. And what Jane worked on for us just between last week and this time is we have the videos up on this section here, course materials. So if you were looking for that information, we did mention something about a YouTube playlist, but this seems to be the best solution that we've got. So if you're looking for the recordings, because I do get lots of emails probably every week about if the sessions are going to be recorded, the answer is yes. Every single week it will be recorded, because we recognize there's a lot of folks that have conflicts with their work schedule. Stuff comes up, right? Life happens. So we're making sure that all of that information is there for you. And yeah, I think that's pretty much the biggest update. We'll continue to put information here for you to the links for the session folders. And, this is sort of your warehouse for where to navigate and find that information. So with that, I think that's all that I had on my end. So I'm just going to pass it over to Natalie.
All right, thanks, Emily. So just to start, we just wanted to do kind of a quick recap of homework expectations. So you all had that spreadsheet to work on last week, and this is not meant to be like homework for the sake of homework, I guess. And so like if you have a system for crop planning that works better for you, you are absolutely welcome to use that. This is more like you going through the steps to prepare for the season and having a chance to get feedback on that. And so if you're struggling with that template, you are welcome to use a different one. Also, we had some questions. I'm sorry about my voice today. We had some questions about the delicata squash example in there. And that was just meant to be like an example so you could get a sense of like what it might look like. So feel free to take that and use it or just delete it and add your own. Does that make sense to everyone? Does anyone have any like logistics questions about how to get that done? Okay, great. So in that case, I have put together a really short kind of recap presentation, specifically going through some of the issues that I saw people getting hung up on in their homework. But before we do that, we're going to do just like a 7-minute breakout room, just to give people a chance to continue to meet each other and then to get people talking. So we have a Q&A after this. So basically these breakout rooms, we want you to discuss when you went through this process of planning for the season, is there anything that you learned? And is there anything that you're still kind of confused about? So Emily is going to get those set up. Thanks, Emily. And then we'll come back and we'll have Q&A for a little bit. I'll do this short presentation and then we'll take a break. And then Brett is going to come in and for the rest of the session, talk about the next module, which is connecting with buyers.
Quick question. How many people would you like per breakout room?
Like 3 or 4 maybe.
Okay. Okay, keep talking for a second because this is going to take a minute.
Okay, so I'll post those questions in the chat here and then we'll post them. I think Emily can post them again once you're in your breakout rooms. Yeah, so is there any, as Emily is still working on the breakout rooms, again, like any technical issues with how to do this process? Right after the breakouts, we'll get to some of the questions about like crop planning and stuff. But if you have any questions about how to actually do that homework and turn it in, you can stay in here for a minute and we can work one-on-one with you. Otherwise, you can join your breakout rooms and we'll come back in about 5 minutes. All right, welcome back, everyone. Hopefully that was enough time to at least get some ideas going. Before I share this quick PowerPoint, I'll just share something we talked about in our group. A couple of people said that this homework process felt backwards from what they usually do. That typically they're starting by looking at the land base and saying, okay, I have space for like 1 row of this. How much can I produce? Versus starting with a production goal of like 200 pounds and working backwards. So that was kind of interesting. And if that is a process that works better for you, you are absolutely welcome to do it that way. You don't have to follow this process. But you may find that if you do this process and do the process you usually do, it may kind of challenge you to think about your production a little bit differently. So any like big takeaways people want to share from your discussions before we jump in? Things you really want to talk about today?
Several people in my group said that they really struggled with the soil test part of it.
Yep.
Some had never done a soil test and didn't know the process for how to take a soil test and get it sent in.
Okay.
And yeah, several people said they struggled and got hung up with how to figure out the right amount of fertilizers to put on based on the soil test. So
Okay. So I will talk about that a little bit this morning. And then last week we talked about offering a whole separate session on nutrient management planning, just because it's such a big topic. So we don't have that scheduled yet, but that is something that we'll do this spring. So yes, I acknowledge that's like a huge topic that most people were not ready to do, and that's totally fine. And we'll have some opportunities to explore that this spring. Thanks for bringing that up. Anything else? Okay. In that case, I am going to share my screen here and just go over some of the things that stood out to me. Now I have to figure out how to get Zoom up again. All right. So I'm going to share my screen. All right. So last week, your homework was to come up with a crop plan. So thinking through how many seeds you needed, what varieties you were going to use, how to plan the days to maturity, so you knew when to plant and when to harvest, and then come up with kind of a general background search for risk management. So what insects are you planning for? What diseases are you planning for? How are you going to fertilize your crops? And we did not go into fertility, so I'm going to cover that a little bit more today. And then again, we'll have an opportunity to really dive into that later. So these are just a few of the things that stood out to me when I was reviewing the homework that people have sent in already. So the first concept was days to maturity. So on a seed packet, that variety will give you an estimated days to maturity. One thing to note is that for crops that are typically transplanted, though that number of days typically refers to the number of days between transplanting and harvest. And so I noticed on a few of your homework assignments that you were planning to seed things like celery or peppers in May. But you really need to seed those things earlier. And then that days to maturity is from the day of transplant. So for celery, for example, we really should be planting now. Peppers are 8 weeks or so. Tomatoes and cucumbers are a little bit less. And so these are also things like if you look at the seed packet, they should tell you when to transplant or when to seed inside. And it's an important thing to get right, because some things are just really slow and need that extra time. But other things like tomatoes or cucumbers, if you plant them too early inside, they tend to get really leggy. They get stretched out and stressed. And so transplanting at the right time is important. So I noticed a few of you maybe transplanting a little bit later than would be recommended. For crops that are typically direct seeded, that days to maturity on the seed packet just refers to when you seed to when you harvest. One discussion that came up last week was, is there like an easy translation for different zones? So if you're in zone 3, should you add 5 days, for example, to that days to maturity calculation? I talked about this with some of my vegetable colleagues, and basically everyone said no. Unfortunately, there's not. Really, those USDA zones have to do with how cold it gets. But once we actually enter the growing season, conditions aren't actually that different. And so the recommendation is to kind of stick with the standard that's written on the seed packet. And then from there, just kind of take good notes in your own farm or in your own garden. The only difference would be like if you're using a company like Southern Exposure or something, like a company that's really based in hot climates, you might want to give it a little extra time. But if you're using kind of some of the standard like Johnny's, High Mowing, Seed Savers, Jordan Seeds, you can stick with that recommendation. So the next thing, I know we talked about this a lot last week, but just kind of a reminder. that the varieties that are well suited for direct market are not necessarily the best for wholesale. And Brett's going to talk about the importance of communicating with your buyers today about what they're looking for. So I pulled this out, and this is someone actually used Moon Stars melons in their homework, and that might be totally fine. This is not saying that that person was wrong, but I thought it was a good example to pull out. So if you're growing watermelons for wholesale, this particular melon, it's really well known. People love it. It's kind of a staple watermelon. It does have some sizing variability. So the description of this is it's an Amish heirloom, 15 to 25 pounds, oblong fruits with large yellow moons and small stars on dark green rinds. It's sweet. And so this is like a beautiful melon at the farmer's market when you really want people to see that rind. In a wholesale market, they might not see it. It's probably going to get cut up and put out on a salad bar or something. And so again, it could be a good choice, but buyers might be interested in a seedless watermelon. They might be interested in consistent sizing, just because if they have like cutting equipment in their kitchen that's more like standardized, they might want melons that are about the same size. So just thought I'd share one more example. And again, like if your buyer wants Moon and Stars melons, that's great. Whoever submitted that is not necessarily wrong. But just another example of differences between what might be really attractive at a farmer's market stand versus for wholesale buyers. One thing we didn't get to talk about a whole lot last week was post-harvest handling and storage. And Annalise is going to talk about this in her session from a food safety perspective. But there were a few things in the homework from just like a produce quality perspective that stood out to me. So in general, like you want to be thinking about post-harvest quality, and we actually have a really great webpage that I will link later. That's a guide to post-harvest handling for fruit and vegetable crops. So some of those principles are like removing the field heat quickly to give your produce a longer shelf life. Things like harvesting in the morning and then keeping that produce cool on the farm. One thing that can be a good idea to do, and hopefully Brett's going to get into this too, is having conversations ahead of time with your buyers about their storage needs. So if you are bringing your watermelon to a local restaurant, they might serve it in 2 days. If you're bringing your watermelon to Minneapolis Public Schools, it might be 2 weeks between the time that you deliver it and the time that it's served. And so knowing that ahead of time can help you to know when to harvest things so that they're still in great shape by the time they arrive on people's plates. And so part of that is also making a plan for curing. Curing impacts storage life. And we have some guides for that on this page as well. Basically just like giving crops time to heal from scars in the field, to make sure that they're in good condition when they arrive. And actually one other thing here. So one piece of feedback I just gave someone was there was like a plan to let things kind of sit in the field for an extended period of time. So I think that might have been watermelons again, where like watermelons technically can stay good on the vine for a couple of weeks, but just keep in mind, there are risks of doing that. So often like animals can get in, you might have a raccoon come in and eat a lot of your melons. And so that's something to think about with your post-harvest management is, can you avoid some of those risks by harvesting on time and having a place to store on the farm? One thing that people really were asking a lot of questions about last week was this idea of staying organized with different softwares. So I spent a little bit of time just kind of looking into different options, and these were some of the softwares I found. Talking with growers that I know most people don't use any of these softwares, but people were really interested in having something. So these were all some examples that came up as options for diversified vegetable growers. I think Tend was the one we talked about last week. That one seems to be the fanciest. This is a screenshot of it here, but some of these other options were like a little bit less fancy and less expensive options to look into as well. So unfortunately, I can't like endorse any of these. I don't have experience with these, but if that's something you're interested in, these are a couple of things you could look into. So those were kind of the main things I saw. And so I wanted to do a quick recap of nutrient management to hopefully get people started with, again, the idea that we can do a more in-depth session later. I'm just going to quick look at the chat. So I'm going to do a 5-minute rundown of some nutrient management things just to have it in mind. So there are 3 main nutrients that fruit and vegetable crops and all crops use in large quantities. Those are nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. And so every year we are extracting large quantities of these nutrients from the soil. And so we have to continue to replenish them if we want to have healthy crops. There are actually 17 nutrients that plants use, but most Minnesota soils, just because of the glaciers, are very rich in other micronutrients. And so we don't usually have to worry about those other nutrients as much. If you do a soil test, you can test for other nutrients, and it's often recommended that you do that once to get a baseline. But on a regular basis, you should be testing for N, P, and K. And so among even really experienced growers, I often hear people say things like, I don't really focus on nutrient management. I just focus on having healthy soil. And I guess I would like to try to convince you that nutrient management is a really important part of soil health. If we're not fertilizing enough, we can't grow healthy plants. But if we're over fertilizing, which we often are, it can be very harmful to the environment. And so when we do a soil test, you will get an overview of some of the characteristics of your soil, like your pH and your organic matter. And your soil test will also directly tell you how much nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium you need per acre to grow different vegetables or fruits. You can achieve that with organic fertilizers or synthetic fertilizers. Organic fertilizers like compost and manure tend to be much lower in nutrients, so you have to apply more of them to get what you need. And those nutrients release a little bit more slowly because they're bound up in organic matter. And when I say organic, I don't mean like USDA certified organic. I mean bound up in organic matter. Fertilizers, even organic fertilizers and composts, list the NPK by weight right on the bag. So 464 would be 4 pounds of nitrogen, 6 pounds of potassium, 6 pounds of phosphorus, 4 pounds of potassium. So it's right there on the bag. And just to give you a quick example of how you might do this, let's say you had a 100-pound bag of this product, this bone meal. That means in that 100-pound bag, you have 3 pounds of nitrogen, 15 pounds of phosphorus, and no potassium. So if your soil test tells you need 60 pounds of nitrogen, you would have to basically apply 20 bags of this product. But you did that, you would be way over applying phosphorus. And so just kind of a quick overview of that math. If I need 60 pounds of nitrogen, and I know that there are 3 pounds in every 100-pound bag, I'm just dividing 60 by 3 to get 20 bags. And then I do it the other way. So in 20 bags, I know that there are 15 pounds of phosphorus in each bag. So 20 times 15 is 300. And that's going to be way over my phosphorus need. And so often we have to do like a little bit of Tetris of kind of mixing different products together to get that right ratio. So the challenge for us is that plants usually need more nitrogen than they need phosphorus and potassium, but most organic sources of fertility, which is what many of you rely on, have a lower nitrogen ratio. So there's less nitrogen compared to the amount of phosphorus and potassium. And it's really important that we're not over applying things. I saw in quite a few of your homework assignments that you were like planning to over apply. But if we're applying too many nutrients, it causes harm to our freshwater ecosystems. And we also often see issues with plant health. Over applying fertilizers can lead to salt buildup in the soil. And so I encourage you to kind of go through this process. And again, we'll have more opportunities to do this more in depth. We'll really be thinking about using cover crops for nitrogen and using products like blood meal, feather meal, alfalfa meal that give you that nitrogen without the other nutrients. And in terms of the logistics of a soil test, I will send a link out. We have a video on our Small Farms YouTube channel that goes through the whole process of how to take a soil test on a diversified farm, kind of thinking through some of the unique logistics that some of you have where you are growing multiple crops, and how do you think about sampling effectively in that kind of situation. So I'll send a video out that walks you through that process. So I'm going to stop sharing, and I will share one opportunity that we just found out about. We just got a grant to do soil testing, like a comprehensive set of soil tests and soil health tests in high tunnels and fields at 100 farms. And so you will be seeing some information about that soon and a link to sign up. So you can actually have your local extension educator come out to your farm this spring and go through the whole process with you and give you one-to-one feedback. So if you are not feeling very comfortable with this process, I highly recommend that you participate in that. And when we have the sign-up details, I'll share those. So that was basically kind of the main things that stood out to me from homework that I was seeing, but we've got, I think, 10, 15 minutes here to do some Q&A before we take a break and transition to Brett. So any questions, anything that you're feeling hung up on?
Natalie, there was a question in the chat. Does anyone know what the temperature is for core chilling for fruit?
Can you explain what you mean by core chilling?
It's a method to slow the ripening process down for different fruits.
I mean, I can tell you the optimal storage conditions for different fruit, and that would slow the ripening theoretically. So I'll just put a link in the chat here. So like apples should be stored at 32 to 40 degrees with 95% humidity. For example, blueberries should be stored at 32 degrees. I'm gonna just directly link that. So this is that post-harvest handling page with all of the recommendations. Okay, good question. So Beverly is asking, how long can we rely on soil test results and how often do they have to be done? So typically we recommend that you test your soil like every 2 to 3 years once you have kind of a consistent process in place. And you can kind of keep using those same recommendations from your soil test. So at least if you're using the U of M lab, they will recommend that you add kind of exactly the amount that your plants need, with the idea that that will again be depleted by your plants over the course of the season. And so you can keep using that for a couple of years, but it's good to keep every few years, like checking in again. If you are trying something new, or if you do like a huge application of compost or manure, like definitely test your soil after that so you can kind of recalibrate where you're at. But if you have a consistent system in place, 2 to 3 years is plenty. Right. So Allison asked, like, did you find a combination of products to fit your example? So actually in the homework, I filled out an example with delicata squash. And so with that, you can see, let me see if I can pull it up here. You can see how I used like a 464 product, like a sustain, just because that's a really common product that farmers use. And I did that to meet the phosphorus needs, and then I stopped. And then in that example, I used blood meal to provide the rest of the nitrogen. So if you go to that homework assignment, you can see how 2 products were used to meet that need. Allison is asking, are there cover crops to help with over applying phosphorus? So any legume cover crop, so like clover, peas, vetch, will give you nitrogen. And so I think it's like a really underutilized tool among farmers, is the idea of planting a cover crop in the fall that contains a legume to give you some of that nitrogen. And there's a really good, actually I have it right here. There's a really good book that Sarah produced called Managing Cover Crops Profitably. It's free online. And they have a chart in this book. I think it's on page 67, that gives you an estimate of, for each cover crop, like what is the estimated nitrogen contribution. So if we do another session on nutrient management that's more in depth, we can get more into that. But yeah, that Sarah Managing Cover Crops Profitably book is a really good resource. And thank you. Emily just put the link to that book in the chat.
Yeah, so Natalie, maybe connect those dots up, like you've got too much phosphorus, not enough nitrogen. The legume cover crop can utilize that phosphorus to.
Unfortunately not. So
No.
so it can provide you the nitrogen without providing too much
nitrogen.
phosphorus. Unfortunately, if you have way too much phosphorus in your soil already, which many farms do, it takes a long time to draw that down. So like your plants will utilize phosphorus every year and take some of that out. But we really don't have a good method for like removing phosphorus other than like stop applying phosphorus and then like keep adding nitrogen, because your plants will keep needing nitrogen until you can slowly draw that down over time. But the main thing is like, just like if you already have enough phosphorus in your soil, don't apply manure, don't apply phosphorus containing products. So a cover crop will not necessarily actually help with too much phosphorus, because the idea of a cover crop is you're returning it back to the soil to provide that organic matter. And so it's taking it up to grow, but then you're adding it back to the soil. You could, I mean, some people, this is maybe a different direction than we want to go. Some people will like harvest, they'll plant something like winter wheat and harvest it and then like feed it to animals or something, just to keep drawing down. But the idea is you have to kind of keep harvesting in order to keep pulling that phosphorus out. So the main message is like, keep an eye on that number. And if it's high, just stick to using things like cover crops, blood meal, feather meal, alfalfa meal, things that just contain nitrogen to give you that, the nitrogen that you need. There any, I know there were a couple other topics, so choosing varieties, calculating seed amounts. Is there anything people are hung up on about those topics, or do those feel pretty straightforward? Yeah, I guess the other part is the planning for insects and diseases. Did that feel okay? Did that feel challenging to figure out which ones to focus on? Thumbs up.
I did have one person in my small group mention that they were already growing garlic and they were happy to find that there were not as many disease or insect problems plaguing garlic. So yeah, that can be a consideration too. Like, what's your tolerance for how susceptible a crop is when you're deciding what things you want to grow?
Definitely.
Is Natalie, do you have a good source for you know, what kind of beneficial insects and other kind of things would say attack wireworm or, you know, various pests?
Yeah, so first, if you have specific pests in mind, our
Mhm.
extension website actually has pretty good like
Okay.
overviews of each insect with like and there should be a biocontrol section.
Okay.
Let me see if I can just like quick find an example. Um, there are some general insects, so like lady beetle larvae and lacewing larvae tend to be really great for like general above ground insect management. In high tunnels, predatory mites can be great if you have mite issues, especially for spider mites. The underground stuff is a little bit trickier and less consistent. Um, there are like beneficial nematodes or fungal products like Bavaria bassiana. Um, they tend to be less consistent just because like soil ecology is complex and sometimes they can really like take off and thrive and sometimes they don't as well. So for an underground insect like wireworm, I don't know offhand. I'm happy to look into it. We also actually have on our team another educator, Marissa Shu, who's our IPM educator, and she can work one-on-one with people for like any insect or disease management, like specific things that you're hung up on.
Okay. Thank you.
Right. I think if people don't have other questions, I'll just say it sounds like Emily's been getting some questions. You like feel free to email me directly. I'll put my email in the chat here in case people don't have it. Otherwise, I think it's on the course website. And yeah, I'm happy to work with you one-on-one with any questions you have as you go through this process. So,
Yeah,
I
for
think
sure. For I would say like today and then, you know, anything from before and then moving forward, reach out to me for like the tech stuff, but like homework specific questions, definitely reach out to the person that was like, you know, organizing that training or the speaker, because they're the experts, right, in that field. So they're going to have the answers for you on that front. Are you good, Natalie?
yeah, should we take our break?
Yeah, let's do that. So, okay, it's 9:50. So let's come back at 9:55. Grab coffee, drink, stretch, restroom, and we'll see you on the other side. Okay, we're gonna keep things rolling along here, and I'm going to pass it over to Brett.
Excellent. Thank you, Natalie. Emily and Natalie. Well, I guess that was really great information. I'm going to start my deck here. And see how we can get that going. How do I turn off the presenter view? Do you know?
I think do you see both? Like, do you see the presentation on another screen?
Yes.
So unshare and then share that screen.
Yep, that's so exactly it. Desktop to share. Did that work?
Yep,
Yes,
sounds
it
good.
is.
Okay, excellent. Great. Yes, that's the lovely thing of having two screens on your desk is that you're always constantly losing your cursor and it's floating around somewhere and you anyway. But I'm glad we've got it working. So for this section of wholesale readiness, it's really about getting to know your buyer and figuring out some plans on who to contact, how to contact them, what kind of questions you're going to need to get out of them, and maintaining those relationships is going to be super important. And I think we're going to run through some slides here and maybe have a breakout session to learn from each other in just a few slides. You know, it was really nice that Emily called us all experts. I know Natalie is definitely an expert. I've been doing speed dating with farmers and chefs and lunch ladies for years, otherwise known as just networking workshops. But that doesn't make me an expert because all of these relationships tend to follow a little bit different paths. It's all very personal and interrelational, and you can't do a soil test to figure out what you need. It's going to be just some muddling through and being open to conversation. And so I can be a sounding board for you, but a lot of it's going to be you doing the work. Originally, when we planned this whole series, this getting to know your buyer section was at the very end of the presentations. And then we realized, well, actually, it'd be nice to have that here in February so that you can start to have those conversations and start to really build out what they're asking for from you rather than guessing what they're going to want. I think that the watermelon is a great example. When you start talking to these wholesale accounts, you'll be able to ask them questions like, what kinds of produce do you want? And that way you can plan for it rather than try to have to sell them something that at the end they really didn't want that. And so moving it up to this point made a lot of sense and should help you with your planting and choosing of varieties and when they should go in the ground. So hopefully that'll help you out. One tool that I've developed, there we go. It's not really a tool, but I've given you access in your homework to this spreadsheet on Google Drive or on Google Docs. And basically this is just to give you a place to start adding in the names, starting to identify who is in your area or in an area that you're willing to go to. So I think Ryan was like, how far do you really want to go? Where does that return on investment start to dwindle if you get too far away? But this is a nice tool for us, and I'm going to have you as part of the homework really fill these out and start to identify who your potential farmer or your potential buyers are going to be. Another tool is that we're going to have for your homework is going to be some kind of contact management calendar. It could be everything from like, here's my a picture of my Google Calendar from last week, or no, this next week, and or it could be a traditional paper calendar, but you're going to need to have one of those, and then occasionally myself actually will knock on the door and say, did you do the thing? Did you call the people? Because that's a lot of times the hardest part of all of this is actually just getting on the phone and cold calling a whole bunch of people that you've identified. I'd like to talk about a couple of different segments of buyers, or channels, as Ryan called them. One of them is restaurants. I'm going to give you a little bit of like a bio. These are kind of stereotypical, honestly, but you're going to find that some of these things are consistent. Restaurants are likely going to be smaller orders. They're able to jump on special deals that you're offering. They have a high interest in quality because they're buying locally. They really want that tomato to sing and not have been in storage for, or on a train for 2 weeks before it gets to them. They can be they're probably going to further process that. So where at a farmer's market, that perfect tomato is what you're trying to get on the table in front of you. They're not so interested. Now, a super knobby carrot can slow them down, and they've got prep time. And so sometimes that is less tolerable, but ugly can be okay. Some tips: non-chain restaurants are more likely to be interested. They don't have as many hurdles and potential snags to getting you in their food service. Also, make sure you know their menu before you contact them, so that you have an idea of what kinds of things you're growing that you think would be interesting to them. And they're pretty time sensitive. Don't call it 4 o'clock or 5. They'll be busy. So I should probably add that to that contact sheet as to what time would be good. I'll do that. Schools are often determined their menus way in advance. Their budgets can be restrictive, although this year through the Department of Education in Minnesota, there are a number of schools with fairly good sized budgets for purchasing local foods. So higher probability this year than in years past. They'll likely need invoicing in net 30 days. They can't pay you at the back door. Not a single school I've ever talked to has a petty cash drawer to buy blueberries when you drive up. So that's good. They're often understaffed. So if you can lightly process some of those foods, they may be very grateful, like pre-shucking corn. And then be mindful of times for them too. They're gone when the school is usually empty. They're empty. They're gone as well. Institutions like hospitals, colleges, corporate campuses, even summer camps. Some of them can have higher budgets and may have more than one food service on their campus, and so different menus. But they're often contracted with food service companies, sort of like an Aramark or something, and a little harder to get to that decision maker. But that is usually a single buyer, and that's their job. They're not trying to juggle, grilling salmon steaks and ordering blueberries from you. So keep that. They'd be a little easier to contact them. Retail grocery stores, co-ops. Co-ops do sell a lot of local food, but are likely to have long-standing relationships with farmers and will be hesitant to abandon them. As you could imagine, if you were that supplier to your local co-op, you've been counting on that for years, and assuming that relationship keeps going forward, you've kind of built that into your business model. And even the co-ops know exactly what they're going to get. So that relationship. So sometimes looking to small town grocery stores, they are more likely to purchase local food and promote it in the past, say 5, maybe 10 years, but definitely the last 5. I'm seeing that here at my local grocery store in Lake City, Minnesota. Quite a bit of local foods. It used to be just apples and sweet corn, but now we're seeing that grow. So keep them in mind. Another hidden potential buyer are food makers, manufacturers of wholesale products, cottage food producers. They can be really highly sensitive to price. Pickle makers, for example, they have a lot of money in jars. They've got all of their life-saving in jars, and so they're pretty price sensitive. So you want to be aware of that. But if you have a bumper crop, or if you set up a schedule now and say that they want for their kimchi, they want 800 pounds every 2 weeks in the fall, then you can plan for that. And they, if it's already sold, your risk goes down, and therefore your profit margin goes up because you already have it sold. So I think now we're going to bump out into breakout sessions. Natalie, Emily, you're going to handle that. And we're going to first talk amongst ourselves, and you're allowed to choose your own breakout, I think. But what are some strategies for finding those hidden buyers, people that aren't the super crunchy local bakery that sources a lot of local, but maybe the places that don't come to mind right away. And then also discuss some strategies for cold calls if you've done this before. Like figuring out who it is you need to call. Somebody told me the other day that they would call up and say, "Who's your food buyer?" They'd tell them, and they say, "Okay, thanks, bye," and then call back in a few days like they knew it all along. That's a strategy for figuring out who you need to call. And then strategies for managing those communications. Are you going to use a calendar, a whiteboard, write it on your palm? Sharing how you want to manage those is the breakout room number 3.
And we will be doing this a couple of times. So the idea is that you can choose one now, and then when we do this again, you can choose a different option. The way I've set it up is that I've got our facilitators, you're already assigned to a room, and then the rest of you can just choose where you would like to go. And then just a quick question, Brett, how much time would you like for folks to chat in this one?
It's let me think. It's 10 now, so I think we could do 2 sessions of like 7 minutes, so 15 total.
Okay. Perfect. So I'll open these, and then you all can choose where you want to go, and then we'll see you in about 7 minutes.
Great. Does anybody want to throw out a couple of hidden buyers that you heard from? I think Annalisa, I was in the group with you. Any that you thought were like, hey, that's a good idea?
We had all kinds of great conversation. The caterers, food shelves, a lot of just like community events. Does anybody else want to chime in and talk about other things? Food manufacturers like cottage food. There was a lot, or just families who purchase from folks. So for example, when tomato canning comes along or pickle making comes along, if you have put your name out there as someone who might have those products and, have a contact information at a farmer's market, for example, or at your farm stand, or have a Facebook page, have some sort of marketing material so that when that canning time comes around, they can find you, then they might contact you and you can make a deal.
One that surprised me was like senior living homes, not like the high rises buildings you see, but like, you know, that there are options that they are living in a group home. I never knew that. So that was an eye opener for me. It's something I learned.
Yeah, the group home was a new one. I mean, I know about them, but there are veteran group homes that are not elderly people. They're just having some time to kind of reacclimate into their communities, and they're living together. So the group homes are a good one. The buying clubs I thought was an interesting one that also could lead to larger sales. It straddles the difference between wholesale and direct. Feels like maybe both, but for canners or somebody looking for large quantities, buying in bulk that way. So those are some great ideas. Any strategies for cold calls that popped out at anybody that sounded like really good ideas?
So Stephen Van Dyke was in the first breakout in that group and had the 3 Ps for doing a cold call: purpose, process, and payoff. So I thought that was an interesting way to kind of structure your script for how you're going to approach someone, to be able to tell them those 3 things.
Yeah, that's good. I thought that writing a script, you don't have to stick to it, but at least you have one, and then that'll create a muscle memory for you to remember what you were going to say and practice it. Maybe on your significant other. Role playing, we considered doing that during this session, and maybe I'll make that an additional homework assignment, is for you to find somebody and set it up so that you can do the role playing. I'm not that guy. I don't like role playing. It makes me nervous, but I'd rather do the actual thing. But it might be a good strategy for you to get comfortable with your pitch. And lastly, anybody come up with some good options for client contact management? No? Well, I'm sure you'll find something, because I will come back and double check to make sure that you have a system in place. It's going to be important. So
what I do, really quick, what I do is I
Yep.
call them, and then I'll tell them when I'm going to call them again, and I'll put it on my calendar. That's all I do right now. I don't know if that's a good idea or not, but that's what I do.
sounds good to me. Warn them. Okay.
Also another good thing to do is to let them know how many servings per unit that you're selling them at that price. Because everybody's concerned about the high cost of foods today, and that they can buy something in the 1 pound for X amount of dollars and they can get so many servings out of it.
Yeah. And that constant contact is going to be important. So, all right, well, I'm going to jump back into these slides and get a few more things that actually I heard in these conversations that are actually in the slides that I have coming up. So let's see, let me share this screen again. Now it's acting up and not showing me my other screen, because that's the way it works. Hmm. All right, bear with me. Okay. I did practice this earlier and it did work. So now I don't know why it isn't. Well, for some reason, it won't. Let
That
me.
looks good if you just hit presenter.
All right. So do you see the presenter view or the regular view?
We see your view with your notes. I think
Okay.
if you do the same thing that you did last time, that should work, where you unshare and then share the other
Yeah.
screen.
But it won't let me. It won't let me. Oh, there we go. Now it did. Okay. Took forever for it to figure out. That should be correct, right?
Yep.
Okay. So one of the other last couple are distributors and food hubs. Just thinking, depending on your size and how far you've gotten along in your food business, distributors are often going to require pallets, much larger quantities in order for them to schedule someone to come pick up from you. And so depending on your scale, that could be an option for you. Food hubs are often a good source, but you have to be within their region. The Good Acre in the Twin Cities does a fairly wide circle, or Sprout is up in the Little Falls area. But we also have developed in Minnesota the Farmers Market Hub. And Jane earlier put a link to farmersmarkethub.org in the chat. There's quite a few resources in there as well for you to look through. But it also has a list of the different farmers market hubs in the state. This is one way for you to list your products and in quantities that are either for individual purchase or for institutions, and be able to find markets that aggregate from multiple farmers. It is likely that you're not going to be growing everything that the hospital could want. For example, you may grow all perennial fruits, apples, or grapes, or something along those lines. This could be a solution where that hospital could come buy your apples and George's potatoes in the same order and have them delivered, and the management of the invoicing and delivery would be handled by those market hubs. But you have to check to see if those are in your region. Some of those benefits for those hubs are increasing those market channels and sales. An indirect benefit is GAPS training, which Annalisa will be doing some introduction to in an upcoming workshop, food safety plans. And for the buyers, generally the one-stop shop and buying online and getting invoiced from one central supplier can be a big motivator for them to purchase locally. So once you've made that contact early with the people from that first sheet that I had you fill out. That initial meeting is obviously trying to find out who the decision maker is. So whether you show up as a cold call in person or you make a phone call, make sure you find out who the decision maker is, because it may be the chef is totally interested in your food, but there's somebody else who does the buying at that business. So you'll need to talk to probably both of them. Call to set up a meeting. Try to meet face to face and bring samples of your product if possible. They will occasionally they'll order from you early on, but they'll order very small quantities just to find out what it is you're selling. So if you can bring that in advance, that'll help them go, oh, I know, now I get it. The cucumbers are those kind of pickling ones, and I don't want those. I want the smooth skinned ones. So rather than having them do sample orders from you, get the actual product in front of them. Also ask for a quick tour of how they handle produce or other food items in their business. So where they store them, what kind of boxes, what kind of shelves. A lot of times they have, for example, a restaurant will have a contract, or not a contract, but they'll order from, say, Reinhardt Foods. And the buyer from Reinhardt has been delivering to the same restaurant for, 6 years. Comes in, somebody checks it in. They'll always check your produce to make sure that it meets their quality. That's their job. But then that driver will bring it into the cooler, put it where it belongs, and just leave. And that's done. Nobody has to help out with that. So knowing their systems can be really beneficial and save them time and make you more valuable to them. Price, some questions you're going to want to ask them, or they're going to possibly ask you, is price and unit size that you're going to be bringing. There are some, back to that farmers market hub.org website, there's some interesting documents on there that show what standards are. And people are probably used to tomatoes that are one size. When they order a flat of tomatoes, they expect a flat of tomatoes, and there's a unit size for that and how many pounds it usually is. So if you can match those to what they're currently ordering, they won't have to do any math to figure out if this is a good deal or if they want to purchase it, because they'll already have an apples to apples comparison. How often should deliveries be made? Are substitutes acceptable? That's an interesting one. For some restaurants can be pretty flexible in that term, but it could be that a school is less able to substitute because their menus have been produced in advance and they have to have a green vegetable on their plate in order to get to the USDA standards that they're required to meet. What is appropriate packaging? A pillowcase is never an appropriate packaging. So you do want to talk to them as to exactly what they're looking for. So boxes usually work really well, but not for everything. So talk to them about packaging. We have an entire workshop coming up on packaging, so you can stay tuned. We'll go over some of those things then. And are there any additional requirements they require? That would be like that GAPS audit or some other kind of, they require organic, or they require, whatever it is, but just make sure that the communication is open so that everybody's on the same page. When it comes to that pitch kit, one of the people was talking about, there's a couple of items that you should bring to that initial meeting. One is a year at a glance calendar that will tell them basically when the produce is going to be available. And also, if they don't see something on this list, make sure that you're asking them what specific produce they would like to purchase. I know that on this particular calendar, it just says carrots. You might want to tell them, I have rainbow carrots. I have these little short, stubby, Parisian farmers market carrots. I have, these different ones. The school is going to probably want very uniform, same size carrots, where the restaurant may be interested in those little tiny ones to steam and put on the side of, fish with, a little bit of the green still sticking out. But you're going to want to be able to have those all laid out at that initial meeting, or at least a guesstimate, because you don't know if you're going to have a crop failure, but it's good to have it there. These are readily available. If you Google year at a glance Minnesota produce, there's one from the Department of Agriculture has one, the Minnesota Grown Program. And you could use that as just a way to get started on your own, because you're probably not going to be growing all of these things, or maybe you will. One other thing that's really important is those promotional materials, having those with you, brochures, a poster about your farm and the produce that you produce, and some of that backstory. It's going to be really important for some clients, and others they're not as interested, and so you have to be ready for it, though, because like I know at schools, for example, teachers and staff really appreciate it when there's a farmer connected to that food. The participation, that's actually their word for when kids actually eat the food, goes way up when there's a farmer who, it says, Farmer Bill grew these, watermelon. Their participation grows up, and that they appreciate that. So make sure the kids know, make sure that that the local paper, if the school starts buying from you, get it out there in the media. One, it is good promotion for the school. It makes them look good, and they don't have to toot their own horn. It could be that you're giving them that nice little extra push to make them feel more connected to you, and will create for a more durable relationship going forward. Be flexible. There's going to be possible times when the season doesn't provide what you said it was going to. And like Natalie said, constant contact, letting them know how things are looking. And, I'm going to have a beautiful crop of, cucumbers this year, and they're coming in and they're all the size of my thumb right now, and we'll be on schedule to have them to you when I said. They're going to want to hear that. And if they're not going to happen, something, you had a hailstorm or something, they want to know that too. They have the ability to find cucumbers somewhere else. So don't wait until the last minute. Always let them know. And be persistent. It's a balance. I think you can overdo it, but I mean, how many people get 3 email, or feels like 8 emails a day from Wayfair, or I don't know, some auto parts store that you bought from 3 years ago and you just have never unsubscribed? The problem is that at a certain point it becomes white noise and it just gets batch deleted. So you want to be somewhere in your contact with them, top of mind with white noise, some kind of balance. a weekly email or phone call is probably the minimum. But every time you contact them, you have to have new information. Something interesting, like we just had like 4 baby goats last week. They're so adorable. And, here's a picture. Oh, by the way, I still have, those potatoes, and we'll be running a special on them for the next 2 weeks, something along those lines. So that's basically some tips and information on buyer relationships and management. And Emily will be getting you some of those, whatchamacallit, the homework in this next couple days, or maybe today. And I will add to that homework a couple of items too that came up during this conversation. So we have some time now, not a lot, but if you have any questions, you can shoot. Oh, here's one. How does a farm get on the hub? It's a good question. Where are you located? Ngozi.
In Egan.
In Egan. So currently we don't have, I'm assuming you're talking about the farmers market hub. We don't have a farmers market hub in Egan, but we are in the process of developing one that will be in Northfield and another one out in Afton. And so those are coming online and should be ready, within the next few months, back to when growing season starts. And the way that you would get on them is there's a manager for each of the sites, and they can help you get set up.
Thank you.
Is anybody else here on a farmers market food hub? I know Jane, you're on one.
Yeah, and Willowlyn is here, and Allison.
Oh, yeah,
is
that's right.
both hub managers, so they have experience with onboarding farmers to the hub.
Allison, do you want to give a quick primer of how you do that?
Well, there is a map on the farmersmarkethub.org. I always forget what the actual address is. There is a map, so I would recommend contacting the one that's closest to you or that you find works in your delivery model somehow. Contact that manager and just ask. I have, let's see, Bev Antonich with Buck Hills Farm and also Kelly Radula with Clear Lake Gardens have used my hub. And I think they would both tell you that it's worth their time. As a farmer, I think it's worth my time, but I'm also splitting my time as the manager and the farmer. So it's a little bit different for me, maybe. Yeah, so you list your products. First of all, you get permission from the hub manager and you go into our online platform and you figure out how to list your products, which there is absolutely help for you to do. And then the buyers buy directly from the website, and then the hub manager organizes how to get deliveries done. It's usually meeting in a central location, and then about how you'll be paid.
Yep. So as those, we'll be around for a while together. So when those 2 new ones that are in the cities are pop up, or close to the cities pop up, I'll make sure to let everyone know.
We've got a hand up from Queen.
Oh, hi. Go ahead, Queen.
I just had a question about the hidden markets again.
Mm-hmm.
Could a CSA be a hidden market? Just some of the things I heard after that, like how you make your pitch and how you talk to them about what their needs are and show them what you're growing. Could that also be a hidden market for wholesale?
Yeah, so generally we think of those as direct to consumer, but one interesting way to look at the CSA model in more of a wholesale kind of lens is to look at corporate campuses or churches and use them as like a central, as the buyer. So the individuals in the church or the school, or I know down here, the Gunderson Lutheran Hospital, they have, I don't know, 18 or 20 employees that get there. So the payment for that, the one down here in Gunderson Lutheran, those are all ordered through the Wabasha Farmers Market Food Hub. And so they order online and it's delivered and they're invoiced for it. If you didn't go through the hub, you could still come up with probably some kind of invoicing to not have to, get payment from every single person, but to have a point person. And then that would feel more like a wholesale account.
So another, I interpreted that question a little differently. I might be wrong, but one thing that people do is like, if you have friends who are CSA farmers who don't like to grow certain crops, like there are farmers who will sell like a ton of squash to CSAs. Or like if you have like CSA farms that don't want to grow potatoes because they have not enough space to rotate sufficiently, so they have potato beetle problems. There are farmers that'll grow like tons of potatoes and then other CSAs will buy from them.
Yeah.
That's I think aggregation considerations, but that is something people do.
So two sessions from now, I'll be talking about
how not to do that.
And I mean, you can do it. It just carries with it some licensing requirements for the farmer who is purchasing products that they didn't grow themselves for their CSAs. So I'll be going into more exhaustive detail than you ever thought possible on regulations for selling local food. But yeah, I think Queen, that's absolutely a potential, the way Natalie described it. It's just that there are some regulatory things that come with that.
Ooh, can you give us a sneak peek before I go down a path I shouldn't?
A farmer who is purchasing product to add to their CSA box, that farmer needs to have a license to do that. Because if it's your own product that you grew, it comes under the product of the farm provision where you don't need a license. But as soon as you're buying from someone else, it's not your product of your farm anymore and you need a license.
Okay, but co-marketing would be okay, as long as each farm keeps its identity and money goes to each farmer.
Delivery is okay.
There, I don't want to take up all the time today to
okay, sorry
because there are
I'm looking at this now, so
there's a really broad state definition of what sell means, and handling food and delivering food is encompassed in that definition of sell. So it doesn't actually matter as much who's getting the money or how the money is flowing. It matters how the product is flowing. So
well, and George, the reality is that the license is pretty cheap, so I wouldn't get too freaked out. If you want to do that,
which license is it?
A wholesale distributor license.
Food handler license. It's
wholesale
called.
Distributor food handler. Okay, thanks.
Not distributor. Wholesale food handler license.
Oh, is it? Okay.
Or retail food handler license, depending on the details of your operation.
That's right.
I promise we'll go through it.
Thank you.
Yeah, I've seen CSAs with bread in them and I'm like, how did that happen? But we'll go over all of that later. Any other strategies or questions on accumulate, or I think one of the last things I want to get to here is, I think Russ brought it up, is there's a cost in acquiring new users. And if anybody's watched Shark Tank or something like that, they'll ask a question: what does it cost? What are you paying for a new customer? And I think you need to make sure that you realize that bringing on new customers is a cost. And I think Ryan would back that up, that it takes time in marketing. And so the customer you already have is the most valuable one. And so making sure that you keep those relationships really tight and in constant conversation is going to be super important going forward. So I know we are literally, Emily said that we had until 11:20, but anybody raise your hand if you wouldn't like 15 minutes of your life back? Seeing no hands.
Okay, so we can wrap up our conversation then. I think that we just wanted to share a couple of like upcoming things. We had a quick question actually, and we'd love for you to throw your response in the chat. So we are curious because sort of over the course of some of the sessions, there have been different things that have come up that we'll want to do a deep dive on. And we're kind of thinking about what's the best way of presenting that information and sharing it with you. So the question is like, one, are you willing to come to any bonus sessions that might be offered that go in depth on some of that information? And then two, what's the best format that could be presented in, either live or a recorded session that you can just watch on your own time? So if you could just throw that in. The first question is yes or no. And thank you for someone throwing that in the chat. And then second question, what format, live or recorded? And then we'll save this chat and then kind of take a tally that way instead of doing like a poll. I didn't really think ahead of time to be able to create that, but that's going to be really helpful feedback for us. Okay, so as folks are throwing that in the chat, I think I'm just going to hand it over, Jane, if you want to talk about the thing that you're going to be doing, and then I'll pass it to Annalisa to tee us up for next.
Sorry, Emily, which thing that I'm going to be doing?
Blazing Trails.
Yeah, the Blazing Trails training.
Oh, okay.
You're working on.
Yeah, so Annalisa is going to present next time on March 7th, and then I will cover regulations after that on March 21st. So I did put the link in the chat to the Blazing Trails Through the Jungle of Food Regulations webpage. You know, if anybody feels like they have an emerging kind of urgent issue and needs to ask me regulatory questions before we get to the presentation, I'd be happy to do that. I do that all the time. Field questions and answer things that people have about regulations. But basically, I'm going to be covering the things that would specifically pertain to produce farms and wholesale sales. And so definitely covering the possibility that Queen brought up of shared CSAs, definitely covering the regulations for other types of aggregation like the food hubs, covering the various types of licensing that may pertain and which ones would be most advantageous for different configurations of business model, and then some things that are not perhaps spelled out in state statute and rule, but that are expectations of buyers in kind of that regulatory realm. So that's what I'll be covering. And again, feel free to contact me if you feel like you have more of an emergency. And yeah, I will put my contact info in the chat. So Annalisa.
Yeah, so very related to that, I will be talking about an overview of on-farm food safety, knowing that it'll be an overview. And many of you have attended GAPS trainings before, or potentially a FSMA training, but some of you have not. So I'll be giving you some highlights from each of the areas of food safety when you're growing fruits and vegetables. So worker health and hygiene, hand washing is of utmost importance, water, testing well water, different uses of water. So these are some things to be thinking about, and I'll be asking you to participate in chat and group in breakouts about the types of water that we're using on their farm. Really vary based on where they're from, the source of that water, if it's from a well or it's from a surface source or it's gathered, such as a rain barrel, and sanitation of our pack sheds. So we'll really get into the post-harvest. So when we're washing fresh fruits and vegetables, especially for a wholesale market, we'll talk about some of those considerations. And then food contact surfaces like our tools, and really keeping those clean and giving you some tips on that, especially as it pertains again to that kind of wholesale environment. And I will be really asking you to think about how to talk about this with a buyer. Sometimes if I was to come out to your farm, or a buyer might come out to your farm and ask about food safety, it frankly can make you a little bit nervous, because it sounds as if I might be judging, or the buyer might be judging, when in reality they just want to make sure that they're not going to be caught in an outbreak, and they want to make sure that you're using best practices, not at all that it's sterile or anything, just kind of best practices. So my goal is to have you be comfortable with the practices, so that when someone asks you, do you test your well water, talk a little bit about your hand washing, you can say, yeah, absolutely, and you can just answer those questions and have some of those vocabulary, so that it doesn't become something that makes you nervous. The homework will be writing up a short food safety plan that touches on all those aspects of your farm. It's pretty broad, and so we will have you do kind of a shortened version, knowing that if you need a gap audit, which I will also explain, you would then have to have a more detailed version, and you would need to keep some records for that. So that's it.
Thanks, Annalisa.
Yep.
Thank you everyone for joining us this week. I'll make sure to add phone numbers, people's work phone numbers to that contact list. I saw your note, Bruce, so you can get in touch with folks. And we hope that you have fun with the homework. We'll make sure that that stuff gets uploaded as soon as possible, as well as the recording. And we will see you in a couple of weeks. So take care, everyone.